Good evening. If you can see me, if you can see us, guess what? It can only mean one thing. It's Mental Health Monday. And welcome to another edition of Mental Health Monday, brought to you by Saving Grace Community Church in Grace House, Cincinnati, a ministry and nonprofit agency of Saving Grace Community Church. I'm Pastor Trevor Phillips, and as usual, with me tonight is Dr. Quentin Moss, Chief Medical Officer and founder of Modern Psychiatry. Good evening, my friend.
Good evening, brother. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well on this Monday. Kind of tired of the tease of spring coming and then here get a little blustery wind across my face. Don't too much like that.
Yeah, right.
I'm thinking of days of retirement in 10 and 15 years where I just may move to Arizona or something. I don't know. But then I have to deal with snakes and so forth and so on.
All right.
Well, tonight we are dealing with a subject that on some level, it affects 3 million people, 3 million cases are diagnosed each year. 3 million people are diagnosed with a disorder that really relates to something that all of us deal with, and that is worry and anxiety. Truth of the matter is, all of us worry about something. Though at times we know we shouldn't, but we worry about something. In fact, many people, social scientists, have identified these 10 things that most people worry about: work, money, being late, their health, the health of a friend, relationships, missing a plane, not waking up on time. So these things, all of us can worry about them. But when you think about worrying, and being a worry ward, which is tonight's topic, really it deals with not just these normal things, but worrying needlessly. But when you think about the origin of the word worry, it has an old English root, which really means not to fret, but strangle. And I think when you think about being a worry ward, when you think about generalized anxiety disorder, it's worrying to a point where you're fretting, and what you're concerned about is strangling you. It has a grip on you. And many people struggle. Some may be walking around today with this diagnosis and not having, with this disorder and not having been diagnosed. And hopefully by tonight, we'll get some insight as to what and why they can't get any sleep, why they feel tired, or why they just worry about everything. Help us to understand from a clinical standpoint, what is generalized anxiety disorder?
It's a medical condition. So I want to make sure that we say that foremost. It is a treatable medical condition where people tend to worry or have a great deal of anxiety, most days than not, about situations that we would encounter in a typical day. So it's not the worry about something that's catastrophic that's happened, but it's about typical everyday life events. People have a great deal of worry and anxiety, and this leads to them being preoccupied by it. This may lead to difficulty in functioning. People may become quite irritable, restless, tired, have difficulty with sleep or appetite, feeling on edge quite a bit. And again, it's all in a circular thought pattern about the typical everyday routine challenges that we face. And some people just have a difficult time trying to manage that.
Well, I mean, when you talk like that, maybe what I've understood and researched that maybe instead of there being 3 million uh, people being diagnosed with having this disorder, maybe it should be like 25 million people.
Yeah, no, we all have our days, right? That we
Hmm.
worry about something that we're going to face that day or the challenge that may be within that day. But if we were to think about an intense sense of worrying that lasts for about 6 months, 6 months consistently, where it starts to also impair our ability to function. So it's difficult to manage work, it's difficult to manage home. Our relationships are impaired because of this intense worry that we have, which again, many of us may suffer from it, but
Hmm.
it's very treatable.
Well, I think one of the things about worrying is that we downplay its effect, or we downplay its seriousness.
Hmm.
We may ask the question, "Well, what has you up at night? What has?" My father used to say, I was awoke all last night walking the floor,"
Yeah.
which is an expression to say, and then we'll trivialize it, or we'll minimize, and we'll make statements like, "Why worry?" Why worry about something you can't control? But for the person who suffers from generalized anxiety disorder, it's a little deeper than just saying don't worry, because who wouldn't want to go to sleep?
That's right. I mean, if they could just shut it off, they would. I mean, who wants to live in that type of experience? But it has a lot of outcomes for the body, man. It beats up our body pretty bad. It allows for us to have this release of this stress hormone, which our body does not like, and so it can over time affect our blood pressure, affect our heart, affect our weight, and place us at risk for other chronic diseases. So it's not a benign thing at all. But again, for those folks who suffer, they wish they could just shut it off, but oftentimes they can do that when they're able to get some help.
Well, here it is, right here, as you've expressed it in
Mhm.
terms of, I don't know if we call it GAD, but for tonight, you've said that.
Mhm.
But just the whole uh, muscle tension. Now,
Mhm.
there is an interesting symptom. Someone may uh, feel as though they need a muscle relaxer,
That's right.
may feel, but they may not understand that it has a lot to do with anxiety.
That's right. The areas that we see a lot of this tension is in upper and lower back. So we
Hmm.
find that people who are, very anxious, these muscles in the anterior, the posterior, the back of the neck, they're pretty tight. And we ask people to try to relax and drop their shoulders. They don't realize that their shoulders have been hunched up and tight, most of the day until you try to get them to intentionally relax them. Same thing for the lower back. People may have a great deal of tightness in their back associated with worry. It's interesting that you mentioned this thing of the strangle, right? The root word of worry. There is a sensation for people who have intense worry, this
Mm.
globus sensation that they can't swallow, like they have a
Mm.
tightness in their throat, which kind of goes along with this whole premise of feeling as if you're strangled, which is what worry does.
Wow, wow. Well, we feel privileged tonight to have someone joining us now who has been diagnosed with having generalized anxiety disorder. We want to welcome to the show right now, uh, Aaron. Good evening, Aaron.
Hello. Good
Good
How
evening.
evening.
are how are you this evening?
Good. How are you guys?
We're doing wonderful, doing wonderful. So you've been hearing us talk about this disorder that affects you. How well are we portraying it? Let us get into your life, your world. Invite us in.
Spot on, especially about the muscles and things like that. So I have actually always had this little knot on the side of my neck, and my lower back has always been chronic. So I see a chiropractor actually every 2 weeks. Um, and even like you said, with something as small as worrying, I the term that I'm usually familiar with is ruminating. So I
Mhm.
will ruminate and I will become obsessive about something that is to another person so small, but to me, I cannot move forward because I think of every possible situation or scenario. So then we go to ruminating to now into catastrophe or catastrophic thinking. So it
Mhm.
just starts small and it snowballs.
Mhm. At what age were you first diagnosed with having GAD, if you will?
I was not properly diagnosed. At first, I was diagnosed with strictly ADD. And then as I got out of, I would say probably out of grad school, then I was correctly diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. So probably around 26, I was properly diagnosed.
So you knew something wasn't quite right. Um,
Mhm.
was there a particular episode or event that really said, you know what, this other diagnosis doesn't seem to be accurate? There's got to be something more.
Yeah. Well, with my job, so I'm in finance as well as I do flips or rehabs. And so naturally, that's a stressful situation. But I just realized that my behavior was not that of, okay, it's a stressful situation, let's figure it out. I would become pretty much irritable, as you said. If someone would ask me a question while there was something going on that I needed to figure out, I would become really short with the person and really, I almost felt as if I had, first I thought, do I have bipolar?
Mhm.
And so I had a contractor on a house and it went so bad. There was water coming in the house, anything that you can happen, you name it. And eventually I found out the person was actually stealing funding from me
Mhm.
through a credit card that I had on file at Home Depot. And I asked the person to leave, and something told me you need to look up your house on the auditor. And I looked up my house on the Hamilton County auditor, and then I went to the recorder, and I noticed that the person had put a lien on my house. And so a lien is basically a mechanical lien is when a contractor or anyone can just go up to the Hamilton County recorder and say you owe them money for labor or materials that they provided on your house. It can just be a flat out lie or it can be the absolute truth. But they can put a lien on your house for $40 and for
Wow.
thousands of dollars. So for
Mm.
$40, they can put thousands of dollars. And so that on top of being in grad school, on top of having to rehab a house, but now I technically cannot sell that house because it has a lien on it. And title companies consider that a clouded title. So my lawyer, I had to get a lawyer, had no idea about anything. I had never even been in a courtroom before. And so on top of just trying to make it out of grad school and have the lawyer call me and I'm walking in and out of class and trying to figure out, am I going to be sued? Do I have to go to court? So that was probably, I was 26 at that time. That was when I felt myself really going over the edge.
Mm. Mm. And so, were there cries of help? Where did you seek help at? I mean, where did you go? Um,
Initially, my mother. My mother is a therapist as well, and so, um, and even prior to that, I was showing signs. I actually do not sleep well. I have not slept well since I was in the ninth grade. My mom would sometimes have to come in my room and spoon me just so I could be a little comfortable. But a good night of rest is about 5 hours, maybe.
mhm, mhm. So, in terms of dealing with your GAD, what are some things that you personally do that help you still function and be able to flip houses? And for what I understand, you're doing quite well. In fact, I was thinking may have to get on with you. but and get a part of that business and see what's going on and find out what's going on. I need to be part of your company. But so what are some of the strategies that you employ such you can continue to be successful and that your disorder doesn't hamper or handicap you or even hold you back?
So I do attend therapy every other week. It's a must for me. I do not skip. Just with personal and with my job, I have to go. And so in my therapy sessions, there is a therapy technique considered EDMR. I do not know exactly what it stands for, but it is reprocessing. It's a technique using light therapy to reprocess my thinking and the pattern of how I process events. And so I will be asked a series of questions. And the first time before I even started the therapy, I actually ranked extremely high. So it was definitely a need. I believe I ranked as 6th. And I believe that was one of the highest rankings before I started.
Dr. Moss, one of the passions of yours is the topic of the power of thoughts. And as Erin has expressed, much like that her thought life, or when she finds herself becoming anxious or worrisome, it's kind of like a domino effect, that one domino falls and then it starts off another chain reaction. What other therapies, and can you break down that acronym in terms of what that involves, that treatment?
I wish I could break down the acronym, but embarrassing I can't. However, it's actually one of the heavily utilized models of therapy that we use for a great deal of trauma and anxiety disorders. And there are various ways of doing it. We can use tapping, we can use lights, we can use sounds, and actually allows for us to get access to some areas of the brain where we can try to kind of disarm some of those thought patterns. And then for people who have trauma, kind of take away some of the pain and the angst that may be associated with that. Specialized therapists are able to do that, but very effective model of therapy. Now, she mentioned some words about catastrophizing, right? So these thought distortions. And part of what we do with helping people with GAD is to help to kind of attack these distorted thought patterns, whether it's black or white thinking, all or nothing, or future fortune telling, right? Trying to tell the future and trying to predict what's going to happen where we have no evidence. But our brain has a way of trying to create these patterns of thought, which often have no validity, right? No truth to them. And then that thought leads to a change in mood and anxiety. So the target is trying to find a way that I can disarm that thought. When that thought comes, finding a way that I can challenge it and showing that there's no evidence that that thought is true. And we can kind of tear down that thought so that we can break the cascade that leads to us starting to have an anxiety episode.
Well, I think many people suffer from anxiety across the gamut of all age brackets. People that I've come to understand here, that people who suffer from dementia or who have an Alzheimer's diagnosis oftentimes have heightened anxiety. And one of the challenges that caregivers have, and one of the techniques, is to say to a person that I know what you're thinking, but let me walk through that and show you why that's not reality. And the truth of the matter is that many times when people who may not received a GAD diagnosis, there are some people who get into that whole catastrophe piece, and many of times, 99.9% of the time, they get fixated on the worst possible outcome or scenario, and it never materializes. But in terms of those who have had trauma in their life, those who have had adverse childhood experiences, though they may have had an isolated event or a serious chains of event of trauma, what is something that even in that case we can say, well, though you've been in an abusive relationship, though you've dated 5 losers in a row, um, though you've had 4 terrible work experiences,
Mm-hmm.
how can you couch that reality of what the real life experience is and help deter them from just projecting and believing that everything else is going to be like that?
You know, the blessing is that we have the power to live in the present.
Mm-hmm.
You know, though we've had whatever experiences in the past, that doesn't have to dictate what we're experiencing now, and surely doesn't have to dictate our future. And the power lies in being able to look at the evidence. And this is key, whether we talk about anxiety disorders or even if we are talking about mood disorders and depression. If I'm able to take a thought and think about, analyze this as far as had this particular anxiety, this particular mood episode, just before that, I had this thought. And then on a piece of paper, and believe it or not, in therapy, it gets down to pencil and paper, writing down, this is the evidence that supports what I was thinking is true. And this is the evidence that says that, you know what, this was most likely not to be true. And start handwriting with each of these episodes what the balance is of the truth that's before us. And what we'll find is that, you know, nearly in all of these instances, there is no truth. There is only lies and what our hurt and our previous experience sometimes tries to tell us, you know, that's occurring right now. That's really not occurring. And if we can do that over and over again in our therapy sessions and also at home, over time, our brain starts to get rewired so that we can automatically start to use the truth through this exercise to be able to de escalate and perhaps even not experience the anxiety or the mood episode altogether. And that is the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, you know, the most research form of therapy that we provide in mental health.
So it's almost like you give yourself a truth serum, and you say, well, let me just say that, that these other thoughts that have gone awry, that let me just put some truth into it.
That's right. That's
Aaron,
right.
how, and in basic therapy, we call reframing. So, and when you think about how has reframing helped you deal with some of your most biggest fears or your some things, worrisome events?
Some events that I've experienced reframing were actually, like you said, Dr. Moss, was to actually write it down. And so I have this whiteboard at work. And so if I am experiencing an anxiety attack or I can feel it possibly coming on, I will write down all the situation, and then I will write down the scenarios that I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And then I will actually write down other examples of when I was experiencing an anxiety attack or ruminating or catastrophe thinking, and the exact opposite would happen. And so by the time I got finished writing those down, I had more positive outcomes than I did have negative. Actually, I did not have any negative. I couldn't really write down a negative. The big things, the things that truly mattered in my life, like for an example, my first semester of grad school, they said, if you don't have a 3.0, you'll be on academic probation. And immediately that just made a red flag go off in my mind. Now, I had over that, but every semester I felt like, oh my gosh, you're going to be on academic probation. But when I took the time to just slow down, write down, okay, this is what I'm thinking. But then the fact was, okay, every semester you've been well above that. Or you won't have money to continue in business. And every time that something popped up, I always had more than enough. So I would just keep writing it down. Even now I have my own personal journals where I have to write down something every day, because if I don't, then I probably will not be able to function at work.
So you could probably 3 categories. As I'm hearing you talk, I would say truth, fiction, outcome.
Mm-hmm.
what is a truth? What is a fictional thought that I'm thinking? And then this was the outcome. And I imagine by journaling, uh, would you say that has helped you as well?
Yes, it's like record keeping, really. You can keep a record of pretty much every small or big victory you've ever had. So mine currently are going all the way back to 2016. So for the last 5 years. Um, so like I said, I was not properly or fully diagnosed. So when I look at my journal 5 years ago, I'm saying, oh, okay, I clearly am showing some signs of anxiety here. So it helps to keep a record, and it helps to keep you on the forefront of what is truth, what is a lie, and what are the actual outcomes.
So that therapy that we were referring to earlier stands for eye movement desensitization, desensitization, and reprocessing therapy. That's what that
Mhm.
is. Okay. So now you know, Aaron. Now we all know.
Yeah.
We're for the better. You just know that it works. All right.
Yes, it does.
So how much did that affect you, and from having been diagnosed with something else, and embracing that, and then getting another diagnosis, which seems to be the appropriate one. How did that misdiagnosis affect you?
At first, it felt like a sense of relief, but then it felt like, oh, here's another thing that's wrong with me.
Hmm.
Um, so that was my first initial thought.
Wow. So now therapy is one form of treatment, Dr. Moss. What are some other forms of treatment for this disorder that may be out there?
Well, before I get to the next form of
Mhm.
treatment, I would, really recommend that folks, when they have these symptoms, that they see their primary care doctor, because there are other medical conditions which can have the same symptom presentation. So people who have thyroid disease, people have other endocrine disorders, can also have a very similar presentation, and those things are very treatable, from a medical standpoint. So it's important that we get those things taken care of. But the other part that's helpful in treatment is medication, and we often use antidepressants, not because people are depressed, but because these medications affect certain receptors in the brain, which are highly linked to certain anxiety disorders. So antidepressants that affect serotonin are very effective, and those being medications like sertraline or fluoxetine or paroxetine. Sometimes we can use citalopram or escitalopram, and those are the generic names for them. But there are a number of medications that are also effective in helping people. But we find that people have the greatest outcomes, and the most lasting, remission of their symptoms if they were to use medicine plus therapy. You
Mhm.
know, then therapy is the thing that creates some sustainability with wellness, because you really have to alter the way that you're thinking. And so I would strongly recommend that if folks are going to do medicine, really it's the therapy that really helps you to be able to have long-term outcomes with this.
That's a great response to those who are self-proclaimed psychiatrists and psychologists on the street corner who just say all they need to do is smoke a blunt.
Uh,
And if they would just smoke a little weed and roll up, they wouldn't be so uptight. Your
Yeah.
response to that, Dr. Moss?
no, actually,
Hmm.
I can
Hmm.
go on for days about,
Hmm.
cannabis and medical marijuana. But one of the challenges of that is that though people may feel that it reduces their symptoms, it then becomes a challenge of having to smoke that or eat that every day at the same time of day without having going through withdrawal symptoms, which are going to look a lot like generalized anxiety disorders.
Wow.
Getting on edge, irritable, anxious. Oh, let me just hurry up and get to my blunt, then I feel a little bit better, right?
Hmm.
So it's a whole nother cycle that's introduced when we try to use things like medical marijuana, which for some people they find its benefit, but the evidence really points to what Aaron was talking about with therapy, and then for those folks who can't get all the way there with therapy, to also add medication.
Aaron, there'll be some folks. There's some folks watching now, and there'll be some folks that will watch, in upcoming days. what can you say to a person who's saying, hey, this is ringing a bell, this is really registering? Why is there hope for them?
Well, there's hope for them because it is okay to be an acceptance of the fact that this is something you're going to live with, but it's something that does not have to control your life. It is something that you can actively pursue mental wellness instead of mental illness, mental wellness. It is something, it's a daily pursuit. It's really like exercise. It's consistency and acceptance of the fact that this is something that is a part of you, but it doesn't really define your livelihood. You can still be successful, and you might have to do some back tracing, like I did. I had to go back into some childhood things, but that leads into more trauma. But there is always a precursor as to how did I get here.
Mm-hmm. Because that speaks to Dr. Moss, what might be the cause.
Mm-hmm. So for some people, it's trauma, right? And there's a lot of evidence to speak to that, and or family of origin dynamics, which made it very difficult. But we also know that in studying the brain, that for some people with this condition, the receptors in the brain have just a different level of sensitivity, right? So, and for those people, probably, intensive therapy would be helpful. And we also know that even the structure and volumes, right, the size of different parts of the brain may be a little bit different from people who have this condition. So there may be a number of pathways to get to the same condition, though there's great treatment for it. I just want to add something else. We talk about this from time to time. We as people of color tend to think that we don't have this condition, right? This is something that the other folks get. And with this particular condition, what we do find when we kind of do a survey of the United States is that people of color typically don't have this condition as often as Caucasians. But when we do have it, we tend to have this condition a lot more severe than Caucasian people. So if you're thinking about some of the things that you experienced and you're going down the list that was on the slide, and you say, you know what, I check a lot of those boxes. Please see your primary care physician. That would be a good place to start. And seeing if you actually have this, get a medical workup to make sure that you don't have any other medical conditions which could cause these symptoms. And then once you're cleared from there, get into some treatment. And I would definitely, recommend therapy. Erin could probably speak to therapy being very beneficial in helping her to reduce her symptoms. But she could probably also tell you that her being able to get into therapy has kind of 10x her life, meaning that she's been able to make a major leap forward probably in some other areas because she has been able to engage in therapy.
Wow. Well, we want to thank you, Erin, once again for being transparent, for being real, to be the brilliant, intelligent young lady that we know you are. And we thank you for giving hope to those who may feel that their situation is hopeless. And it is true that mental health is health. Mental wellness is just being well. And just as any other physical issue that we may have to see a doctor for or take some pills for, this certainly is something that may be in that scope. So to all of you who have joined us tonight, and those of you who are watching this program after it has originally aired, we conclude by sharing with you our prayer and always what we really desire for you. And that is that truly you will feel better, you'll become better, and you will live better. On behalf of myself and Dr. Moss, we wish you a great evening. God bless you.